Hi, everyone, and welcome to 1105 Media and Redmond Mag's coverage of the SQL Server 2025 public preview launch event that happened today at Microsoft Build. And I have with me Suresh Tota, who's the CVP for Azure Database at Microsoft. And we're going to talk about the launch and some of the things he sees for the future of databases and where he sees the organization kind of going. And I just wanted to get some feedback on some of your thoughts, Suresh. I've spoken with members of your team. I'd like to thank Bob for helping me, Bob Ward specifically, for helping me put together a lot of the material that I was in my column today. But I feel like SQL Server 2025 represents the culmination of some really big investments from Microsoft. We're going to walk through a few of these in this interview, but what are you the most proud of in this release?
Firstly, thank you, Joey. Thank you for having me here. I'm really excited about the announcements that we made. This is a monumental release for SQL Server. 2025 is a big release. So to answer your specific question about the things that I'm excited about, I broadly think about the releases, the changes that we are announcing today in a couple of containers and categories. The number one thing is that this is an AI release. For the first time, we're basically introducing native vector types, vector functions. We're also bringing vector indexing with this KNN. So it's a big deal. In addition, we're also integrating a SQL Server with various models. You could host a lot of models locally. We interact well with the language frameworks such as LangChain, etc. So you could do quite a lot of AI intelligent applications inside SQL 2025. So that's the first category. The second one is that this is a very dev-friendly release. So you would see release changes such as JSON indexing. Regex is getting a huge uplift. POSIX compliant regex queries are going to be really good. We are also announcing support for change event streaming, where you could take the changes and basically subscribe it directly into your change streams and basically build the modern change-driven architectures very well. That is the second category. The third one, I kind of call it as an enterprise category, where you basically have things such as high OLTP concurrency, features such as optimized locking coming into SQL 2025. We have things such as TempDB, resource governance coming in. And then on the other hand, there is a high availability capabilities. We've been investing quite a bit on availability groups. You'd see a lot of those changes here. So those are all sort of an enterprise bucket. The last bucket, I would say, is the hybrid integrated data estate, where we are bringing the goodness of the cloud to your data, wherever your data is, on premises, anywhere. So things such as Arc agent basically enables you to use Entra ID authentication through and through. You'd have things such as mirroring natively into Fabric, etc. So these are all the key categories: AI, developers, enterprise, and then finally the integrated data estate. So I really couldn't pick one favorite feature or a couple of favorite features. It's extremely hard. We've basically focused on making sure that we listen to our customers. We basically address some of the quality concerns or any of the gaps and features that they've been asking us. And in addition, we are also trying to innovate. So it's a balance between the two.
Let's dive a little bit deeper into AI, because I think it's really interesting. And one of the things that I think is kind of unique about SQL Server, and maybe you can go a little deeper on this, especially with its implementation of AI, is I know, for example, in Azure SQL Database and in Azure Postgres, we have vectorization there. But you're tied into using Azure OpenAI for security and other various reasons. And I think even some of the competitor databases, like Oracle, for example, they have AI, but it's kind of limited. Can you dive into what being able to choose your own model means and how that is going to help, especially probably enterprise and financial kind of customers that have security concerns?
Yeah, so firstly, AI of course, is all pervasive. It's really a transformational time, and so we had to make sure that we are covering the needs of our developers first and foremost. They got to be a really good use case, and so what we have done is to listen to our customers and understand that they wanted to go do semantic searches natively side by side with their operational stuff. So we don't want to make it burdensome for them to go do vector indexing, vector database somewhere else, operational workloads, while you're doing operational workloads in SQL. So we had to bring all of these things together. So the approach that we've taken is to basically natively support vector types and functions, etc. One of the major things that we have done differently is the type of indexing that we have. Most every database out in the market does vector indexing in memory. There is an indexing algorithm called HNSW, which
Mhm.
basically stores all these vectors in RAM. And it is efficient if you basically are able to put all the vectors in memory. It has its own characteristics in terms of recalls, precision, speed, etc. What we've seen is that increasingly most of the customers basically want to scale their workloads. And to
Mhm.
do that, you need an indexing data structure that can spill to the disk, just like B-tree.
Mhm.
So what we've done here is to basically partner with Microsoft Research, and we brought the best. In fact, I think it is the state of the art indexing family of algorithms in vector indexing. It's called DiskANN.
Mhm.
Stands for disk accelerated approximation nearest neighbors. It's very self-explanatory. And this basically allows you to store the indexes natively on the disk. It brings the data into the memory as needed. It isn't that it is not really using it, but it basically does these clusters of nodes. Effectively, ANNs are all graph indexes, graph
Mhm.
data structures. So you'd have to have the correct amount of navigation. So you have to reduce the number of hops to get to the approximate
Mhm.
spot to get the results, right? You
Yeah.
you convert these data types into mathematical formats like embeddings. These are all just vectors, and store it in an index. And these are high dimensional vectors. We're talking about thousands of dimensions in some cases.
Mhm.
When you have such a high dimensional graph, searching becomes extremely hard, very compute intensive. So what DiskNN does is that it basically knows what are the hotspots. Think of these as intermediate nodes in B-tree, right?
Mhm.
So you'd get there, and then when you get to and you're basically navigating to the right intermediate node to get to the leaf nodes. In the same way, we know what are the hotspots, and then identify those hotspots, keep them in memory as much as possible, and seek to the disk and make minimal IOs to get to the disk. But you don't have to be limited by the amount of memory that you might have. That is the very short version of what DiskNN does. It does extremely well in terms of relevancy, latency, and throughput characteristics. And these numbers are much better than some of the industry-leading memory-based vector indexing algorithms. So that's sort of the key part.
Cool. Yeah, do you want to dive into bringing your own model too? Because I think that's something a lot of
Yes.
customers may not fully comprehend, but I think it's really important.
Yeah. So, SQL Server basically lets you host your model locally. So you basically have, let's say, you can run Olama model, for instance. There's lots of models that you could just
Mhm.
download and host it on your own local proxies, gateways, on your local data centers.
Mhm.
And, we have native sort of language support to basically SP invoke into these models, and using REST APIs readily integrated, you can call into these models. And if you want to change these models, for instance, you are trying to do specific domain specific operations, you don't need to change the programming interface. It
Mhm.
basically remains the same. All you need to change is come up with a new model, and it continues to work. We do have to trigger a reindexing, but it's smooth, seamless. It's completely secure because you can keep all these models locally. And one of the
Mhm.
concerns that people have for AI is A, security, and B, is the amount of data that you need to ingest it upwards to
Mhm.
the cloud in some cases. So in such cases, if you have such concerns, then SQL Server with the local models work beautifully.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a really nice touch. One of my MVP colleagues actually set up a Docker configuration to run SQL Server and Alama, and I've been meaning to try it. It requires an Intel CPU, so I have to do some work. But you've told me before that you feel like it takes 20 years to build a robust database platform. SQL Server is now 30-year-old. How do you see the platform continuing to evolve, not just with 2025, but going forward?
One of the interesting things about relational databases is that the characteristics of the core engine don't necessarily change. I mean, the paper that was written by Card, it's now almost 50 years, and the theory, the relational algebra, has stayed consistent. What
Hmm.
has changed is how the architecture evolves with the different parts of the stack. So there is a paper called OLTP Through the Looking Glass that was published in 2007, the first time. And when they published it, it wasn't surprising. Once you take the sort of the disk away,
Hmm.
it the CPU aspects come up and they become the bottlenecks.
Hmm.
There's lots of aspects in terms of how you use your data structures, how you interact with various things, etc. Latching becomes a problem, etc. Fast forward to 2025, thankfully these authors have went back and done the same work. What they have found is that given the amount of changes in the hardware and how we have been evolving our architecture, the bottleneck has moved to communication now.
Hmm.
And that is not surprising to us because it's sort of really become because we are trying to do many RPCs to achieve a lot more things,
Hmm.
be it high availability, be it multiple nodes trying to write concurrently, etc. So there's lots of features, especially in the cloud, you'd see a lot more. It
Hmm.
definitely applies to the data centers and on-premises as well. So the challenge for us is to make sure that we're evolving the architecture to the needs of the modern hardware and continuing to keep the architecture up to date. That is one of them. The second thing is that workloads have begun to change. Workloads are certainly evolving significantly with big data, with volume, with variety. You think about JSON, the semi-structured indexing integrated with relational stuff. Those things are important. And the third piece that certainly is new, but it is significantly changed everything is AI.
Hmm.
And that needs to be infused not just as a features for the customers, but also how we think about our architecture internally.
Hmm.
When you think about features such as excuse me, intelligent query processing, for
Hmm.
instance, how do you really think about machine learning as a mechanism to basically go do better selection of indexing, and there are lots of other pieces in terms of even interacting with operating system. All those characteristics are going to be have to put to a different test, and we need to evolve, and that is the challenge. Despite having a successful 30 years plus history, we're continuing to innovate.
Hmm. Very cool. Yeah, yeah. I think it's very exciting. One of the other things I wanted to talk a little bit about is Azure, because something I learned a couple of months ago. I've been working on Azure pretty much since the start, but I didn't realize that, and it makes me feel old. Azure celebrated its 15th birthday in March. I'm not sure if you knew that.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, I was part
yeah,
of
yeah,
the early
yeah,
days
yeah.
of
We had cupcakes at Mark Rusinovich's talk at MVP Summit.
yes.
Uh, I feel like largely things in the cloud have kind of settled past the shakeout phase and really into maturity and advancement. You have some workloads remaining on-prem, and I think having a new release of SQL Server plays to that. We see, in my experience, and I see about 15-20% of those workloads shifting to PaaS solutions. I think that number will continue to grow gradually. And then probably another 30-40% of the remaining workloads in IaaS. How do you see that evolving, and where do you see SQL Server fitting into that equation?
I think this is probably the first innings of the cloud, and the first
Hmm.
innings of the cloud has basically brought us to as far as it has, and basically the challenges in terms of perceptions of security challenges, be it isolation guarantees, performance guarantees, and the administrative controls, etc. Those things have shaken out, and I think we have settled to a good equilibrium right now.
Hmm.
What needs to happen going forward is a significant amount of confidentiality guarantees.
Hmm.
And you mentioned Marcus, and basically this is the kind of work that we do very seriously.
Hmm.
We want to provide absolute guarantees in terms of who accesses your data, what are the boundaries, how do you access, what are the means of accessing without diluting the performance characteristics. And as you know, SQL is a leading architecture for that. We have always encrypted. We
Hmm.
work closely with confidential VMs, etc. So that's one aspect where security is a big chunk, and I think you would see massive strides in that space in the cloud,
Hmm.
and that may change the equation in terms
Hmm.
of how much movement you would see from left to right, from on-premises to either IaaS or PaaS. But we do see
Hmm.
that happening more
Hmm.
aggressively. Then the other part that I would say is that the migration upwards, even further to the north of PaaS, into SaaS,
Hmm.
and this is something that we have been embarking with. SQL Server in Fabric.
Hmm.
And you'd see that it is in public preview, and we have basically made some good progress there. So lots of amazing momentum from customers who want to have the power of SQL, but not having to deal with lots of monitoring, administrative challenges, etc. And here, AI will play a big role in the coming few
Hmm.
months, even like not even years.
Hmm.
There's lots that's evolving really fast. So what used to be pretty challenging and pretty much out of the reach would definitely come into the realm of possibility with AI breaking in and SaaS becoming a distinct possibility. So these are a few characteristics I would say, and just integration with various other cloud services also will play a bigger role. I
Hmm.
do. We do believe as Microsoft that there's going to be a strong on-premises presence for various reasons,
Hmm.
and we are committed to supporting it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing SQL Server 2025.
Hmm.
We believe in this, but we also think that the migration to the cloud is also accelerating for the specific reasons that I mentioned.
Cool. Let's go back to SQL 2025. I wanted to you brought up intelligent query processing, and that's been a family of features I think Microsoft's made a solid investment into, uh, and it kind of builds on top of the query store. And I think that that's seeing some attention and some completion of features that were started. Can you talk a little bit to that and what you're excited about there?
Yeah, so query all up in general, we've been focusing on making sure that we listen to the feedback and we try to do the right things in terms of evolving the capabilities. It is extremely hard to basically, trying to completely take over the indexing capabilities away from an administrator.
Hmm.
And we believe that we have to partner with the DBA community here in terms of making sure that they get what they need. We think of ourselves as assistants in terms of helping them. We don't think of ourselves as completely taking over um, DBA roles and their responsibilities, but we want to assist them so that they have the right intelligence. One of the coolest things that we see is telemetry, the telemetry that flows in across the different aspects. It's not just about the workload, but it also is about how it interacts with the capacity that you're provisioned, with the kinds of other external workloads that you may be engaging with. In the modern day, you would be engaging a lot more with the OpenAIs of the world, or could be any other model, etc. So when you are doing those kinds of engagements, you have a certain kind of capacity characteristics. Most importantly, the traffic patterns that generally change in a different way at different times. And there are subtle differences in terms of the subtle traffic patterns. So telemetry all up can be fed
Hmm.
into our models, and that is kind of one of the focus areas that we have. And we will be talking a lot more in the future, but at this point, that sort of like is an opportunity that we're very excited about.
I just want to mention, throwback to an old interview I did on Redmond. I did a two-part interview with Connor Cunningham about how SQL Server uses telemetry. I think that was back in like 2018. But good if you're watching this and you want to learn more about how Microsoft securely collects telemetry, that's a good place to start. The query storage is really a great feature, and it's something that I think has been really wonderful. One of the questions I have, because we are in a cloud world, and software does tend to move at the speed of, or software moves fast. Let's just put it that way. Databases, on the other hand, are all about stability. You mentioned Cod's paper and how foundationally we haven't changed. How do you balance out in your organization kind of the development philosophy there? Balancing out, making changes and like it's always kind of interesting to me because sometimes we see features come into Azure SQL first, sometimes we don't, and I know that's all around development cadence. But if you could speak a little bit on that.
It's a really hard balance. It's a really hard balance, especially for databases, because the guarantees that we have to offer for databases are immense. It is not a stateless workload promise. It's a stateful workload promise where we have to make sure that we are thinking about the core promises. How do you store the data durably? How do you serve it efficiently and securely? This sounds very simple, but in practice, it's extremely hard. We do debug at times hardware a bit corruption on the disk or some memory corruption. These things happen.
Mhm.
These are 2 sigma, 3 sigma events. They do happen. When they happen, it could be catastrophic. So we are always constantly watching out what could we do to offset those kinds of problems. So to specifically answer your question in terms of balancing it, the number one thing that we do a lot and focus quite a bit on is our testing, making sure that we are investing significantly in integrating our workloads across the board. And one of the best things about SQL is that we have an enormous first party estate that
Mhm.
basically tests this before we put anything out into the world. So if you think about some of our largest customers, it's actually Microsoft,
Mhm.
right? And in many ways, if you think about SQL Server, the biggest customer for SQL Server is Azure SQL, because we
Mhm.
ship it first, we train it, battle test it, and many of our Microsoft services use it at a massive scale, much bigger scale than many of our external customers use it.
Mhm.
And so that gives us an enormous confidence in terms of the quality. The challenge is to make sure that we balance it with the innovation as well,
Mhm.
because there is a certain rate at which you can ship databases.
Mhm.
It is not. advisable to basically ship databases like a front page of a social media app. Right.
Please
Um,
no.
and so obviously I'm painting an extreme outlier
Mhm.
here, but that is the key part here. We got to make sure that these bits, whatever changes we make, there's a lot of pressure in terms of going really fast, but we want to make sure that we don't deviate from these pressures. The best thing for us is that we have a great 1P estate that we dog food ourselves.
Yeah, it's always interesting to hear when I talk to some of the engineers to hear, how quickly feedback cycles and how and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but Microsoft is largely running on Azure SQL database more than I think any other of the components, which that kind of leads me to another question. I frequently get, I've done talks on this. There's a lot of Azure data solutions. We have managed instance, we have SQL database, we have hyperscale, we have SQL and Fabric, we have SQL Server. Kind of from a marketing, and I think I understand the marketing, but from a customer perspective, how do we help understand or help customers understand how to make the right choice and what solution to choose and what helps them drive those decisions?
It's a great question. So obviously, we think of that as a flexibility, and we have to do obviously better in terms of helping the customers to understand where they choose, what they choose, etc. The best way to think about it is that if you want to lift and shift your applications into the cloud, SQL VM is a very good choice. If you want to modernize without losing the compatibility of your SQL engine, managed instance is a perfect place. If you want to build new applications, cloud native applications, and take advantage of all the new things that are happening in the cloud, Azure SQL DB is the best place. And hyperscale in particular is the best choice because we continue to innovate a significant amount of energy there. And we also offer flexibility with general purpose, but those are all family of Azure SQL DB, basically. Now, we are certainly excited about integrating into the unified data estate of Fabric, and this is where we're bringing SQL into Fabric. But think of SQL hyperscale version, the Azure SQL DB version, basically running in Fabric, and it isn't any different. Basically, Fabric provides a SaaS version of Azure SQL DB, but broadly speaking, it's about lift and shift of your application into VM, migrate and modernize with SQL MI, and build new applications, cloud native applications with Azure SQL DB, perhaps in Fabric. And obviously, we will always continue to invest in and modernize SQL Server for those who are not yet ready to get to the cloud.
I have two more questions and then we'll wrap up. And one came from a friend of mine in Germany. And I think with this release, we kind of see a little bit of an answer to the question, but I think there are still some perceptions in the data platform community that SQL Server no longer gets the same investment and priority in the Microsoft data platform, giving the advent of Fabric. Can you talk to that a little bit and help explain the importance of SQL and
So the largest engineering team to address this question in Azure Data is SQL Server
Mhm.
and Azure SQL. We haven't made any changes in that priority. Azure SQL continues to be the powerhouse in terms of how we think about our Azure data portfolio.
Mhm.
And no matter who you ask up my chain, this is a consistent answer because it is the truth. We
Mhm.
are definitely continuing to invest significantly into Azure SQL. We think of Fabric as basically a complementary piece to what we offer in Azure SQL because we are trying to make Microsoft Fabric as a unified data platform, and trying to bring databases into the unified data platform unlocks just an amazing amount of capabilities. We think about it that way. We don't think of it as a Fabric versus Azure SQL. I do think that when you bring in operational databases, getting those insights instantly and working closely with messaging patterns and all the other data warehouse, Power BI, etc. It just makes the life of our customers really easy, and we are seeing a lot of good insights. Rest assured, we are investing massively in SQL family. SQL 2025 is a great proof point for that, and you'd see, continued innovation in this space.
Mhm. One final question, and it's personal to me because it's something I care about. I use a MacBook as my daily computer. When are we going to see native SQL Server on ARM and maybe SQL Server Management Studio?
Firstly, I completely agree that SQL Server needs to be on ARM. We are fully committed to doing this thing. You know, we are absolutely committed. We will be talking a lot more about this in the future. This is not a question of if, it's definitely a question of when. And we're making good progress on that one. I will have more to say about it in the coming few months, but we're certainly focused on it.
Thank you very much for your time, Suresh. I really appreciate it. And viewers, I hope you enjoyed this video and read what we have at Redmond Mag to cover Build this week. There are some excellent stories all about the announcements Microsoft has made. And I know I have a really detailed one on SQL Server 25 and its new features. Thanks and have a great day.